And when you call my name, I won't be far away. No matter where you go, you'll never be alone. Be alone, be alone. No, you'll never be alone, be alone.
Ponytails. Read by Scribbler. Dark clouds loomed overhead, but that didn't stop Tennyson from showing his vibrant green leaves to Applebloom. The wind was blowing, and with it he swayed his branches down to stroke her face, causing her to giggle. She sighed, taking the time to sniff and judge his newly grown golden delicious apples, the first he'd ever made. She exhaled, eyes closed and bearing a proud smile.
Look, Applejack!
The filly yelled.
Tennyson's grown his first apples!
Applebloom's older sister trotted over to them, carrying baskets with Granny Smith apples inside them. Despite the wind, her Stetson stayed on top of her head. She took a look at Tennyson's apples and smiled.
Well, I'll be, Applebloom.
She patted the filly's back.
He's gonna grow up to be a nice, strong, healthy apple family tree. You just wait and see.
Applebloom turned to her sister with a large smile.
Did you really think so, sis?
Shoot.
She pulled her sister into a hug.
You've been taking care of him since he was nothing but a tiny little seed. Now look at him. He's growing his own apples and fine ones at that. He's gonna be a big one. Heck, he may even be bigger than any of his brothers.
She saw Applebloom swell with pride, not taking her eyes off Tennyson.
Now, come on.
Applejack shifted the baskets off of her and onto Applebloom, who accepted them with an audible oomph.
That storm will be here any second now, and we need to get the last row booked.
She watched as Applejack cantered away to the western fields. Applebloom then turned to Tennyson.
Hey, champ. I gotta go and help my sis with the rest of the apples. I'll see you after the storm, okay?
The wind picked up, and Tennyson reached his branches out to her.
Hey, it's okay.
She said in a soothing tone, wrapping her hooves around the trunk.
Don't be scared, Tennyson. Everything's gonna be fine. The storm will pass over and you'll be safe and sound. I'll come see you after the storm, okay?
She kissed him and let go. He stood proudly upright for her.
That's my boy.
Applebloom.
Oh, horse feathers. Come in!
With one last proud look at him, she adjusted the baskets on her back and galloped after Applejack. The clouds raced to cover Ponyville in their dark shadow, but the Apple sisters were quicker, filling the basket with the rest of the Granny Smith apples that needed to be collected. Applebloom was in a state of scrambling and galloping, barely catching the last tree's batch of apples, before racing to barely catch the newly bucked tree's apples. They soon finished that row, with no apples missed, and they galloped off to their house, the full baskets on Applejack's back. They reached the barn as the first drops of rain came down. Winona was waiting for them on the front steps, wagging her tail excitedly and barking at them. Applebloom kicked the door open, and Applejack ran inside with the baskets. The first flash of lightning and crash of thunder arrived, making Applebloom jump.
Could you hurry up in there?
Hold your reins, I'm a-comin' out.
Applejack ran out and they both galloped under the eaves. They stood there for a moment, panting and watching the rain begin to pour down. Winona sat there, wagging her tail.
We did good, Applebloom,
Applejack said after they calmed down.
Let's go inside.
She opened the door and let her sister and Winona rush in. The door closed behind them, just as another flash of lightning came. Applebloom stared out the window for a moment, shrinking back each time she saw another bolt of lightning. Thunder continued to rumble. Just then, they both heard a rumble very close to them, and Applebloom looked at her sister.
So, when's dinner gonna be ready?
Applejack laughed.
Now, we just got in here. Can't you think of nothing else besides...
Her own stomach growled. She smiled sheepishly.
I guess I'm a bit hungry as well.
A bit?
Applebloom smiled.
I'm famished.
Yeah, well, why don't we go and wash up before we have dinner?
Applebloom was about to protest, but her older sister gave her a stern look that stopped her. She groaned.
Fine.
After a shower and a family dinner of mashed potatoes, green beans, and bread and butter, Applebloom was feeling rather tired. The wind whistled, and thunder shook the house. She followed Applejack closely up the stairs to the bathroom, where they began to brush their teeth.
Hey sis,
Applebloom began, toothbrush in mouth.
how bad do you think the storm's gonna get?
Applejack spat into the sink.
Huh?
I mean,
Applebloom let go of the toothbrush, letting it hang out the side of her mouth.
what if the storm's so bad, one of the trees falls over?
Applejack chuckled.
Now that's just plumb silly.
She ruffled her sister's mane.
I doubt there's a storm out there that could knock down an apple family tree.
Are you sure, AJ?
Applebloom's voice quavered.
Are you doubting your big sister?
Applejack asked playfully. When she saw the concern on her sister's face, she sighed.
You're worried about Tennyson, ain't you?
Applebloom nodded.
Now, look here, Sugar Cube. Tennyson's been through storms before, and he'll go through many more. He's always come out fine, just like his brothers. He's an apple family tree. And apple family trees are strong. Besides, y'all raised him since he was little, and now he's growing up. He's gonna be strong enough to survive any storm that comes his way.
As she finished this, the house shook harder, and Applebloom squeaked.
Don't you fret none, okay? He'll be fine.
Applebloom smiled and spat into the sink.
Peh! Thanks, sis. I can always count on you to say the right things.
Applejack chuckled again.
Yep, well, I am your big sister after all.
There was a roar of thunder, and the house shook even harder. The next second found Applebloom clutching onto Applejack's foreleg. Applejack sighed.
You want to sleep with me tonight?
Applebloom nodded quickly, and could only manage a high-pitched,
Alright then, let's go.
Applebloom let go and raced to her sister's bedroom. She pushed the door open and dove under the covers just as lightning flashed. She stayed there, trembling, until she felt a hoof push her over. Once another body was laying next to her, she cuddled against it, intent on getting as close to it as possible. Despite the noise outside, from the pitter-patter of rain against the glass and thunder rumbling, she took comfort in her sister's warmth. Applejack put a hoof around her sister's neck.
Good night, Applebloom.
Good night, sis.
With a deep breath, Applebloom closed her eyes. Applebloom awoke with a start to a very loud clap of thunder. She ventured a look outside and saw the rain cascading down and the wind blowing the trees back as if trying to take them from Sweet Apple Acre's ground. 2 bolts of lightning illuminated the sky, and thunder roared at Applebloom. She darted underneath the blanket.
Why do thunderstorms have to be so loud?
She turned to her sister, who was snoring.
Darn it, why can't I fall asleep like AJ or Big Macintosh?
Appleblossom curled up tighter into herself as the roar of thunder shook the shutters. She could hear Winona whining.
Don't be such a scaredy pony, Winona. It's just a stupid... Come on over here, Winona!
Winona crawled over to her, huddling herself with Apple Bloom.
Don't you worry, Winona. Applejack's here to protect us. Yeah! Applejack will protect us, and Big Mac, and Granny Smith. We'll be fine.
Winona stopped whining.
Good dog. We'll be fine.
2 more bolts flashed, but she didn't pay it any mind.
We'll be safe as long as we're in here.
The wind blew harder, and the house began to creak.
Gee whiz, this storm ain't letting up, huh, Winona?
She perked up and saw the trees swaying with the wind, seemingly unperturbed.
Tennyson's been through storms before, and he'll go through many more. He's always come out fine, just like his brothers. He's an apple family tree. An apple family trees are strong.
Applejack's right. Tennyson's been through many storms before. This one's no different.
He's gonna be strong enough to survive any storm that comes his way.
I just need to relax and stop worrying so much.
She let her head touch the pillow again.
He's gonna be fine.
The wind picked up again, making the house creak more. Apple Bloom sat straight up.
Of course, it wouldn't hurt to check up on the little fella.
She tossed the blanket off of her and crawled out of bed, making sure not to touch Applejack. She deftly hopped down and felt her way through the room until she was in the hallway. The stairs creaked as she made her way to the kitchen. Once there, she fumbled around in a drawer until she found a lantern and lit it. She stared at the flickering flame and sighed.
Tennyson may be big, but he's still young. He's still a baby.
Settle down, Winona. We're almost there.
The puppy yapped at Granny Smith's hooves as Apple Bloom, still in diapers, was giggling and riding on her back. They had woken up early to check on something. Neither Applejack nor Big Macintosh were awake, leaving Granny Smith all to the excited filly on her back.
Are we almost there, Granny Smith?
Patience, child.
Granny Smith laughed.
We're here.
She remembered how they approached a very small plant, newly sprouted. She jumped with joy on Granny Smith's back.
Granny Smith! Granny Smith, look!
Yes, I see, child.
Granny Smith took Apple Bloom and placed her next to the plant.
He's starting to grow, and you helped it, child.
I did?
The first touches of its few leaves sent a smile to Apple Bloom's face.
I did!
You gotta keep helping him, child.
Granny Smith said seriously.
You can't expect him to continue on his own. You gotta be there for him.
I will, Granny Smith.
She felt herself being lifted up and put back on Granny's back.
So what you gonna call him?
Granny Smith looked down with a smile.
He's your tree, Apple Bloom. You name him.
She sat there for a moment, thinking of a suitable name for the sprouting plant.
Tennyson!
What was that, child?
Tennyson!
Apple Bloom tried to say again.
Tennyson.
Yeah!
Granny Smith chuckled.
Tennyson it is. Now don't forget to water Tennyson later on.
Apple Bloom hugged her.
I promise, Granny Smith. He's still a baby.
She heard whining to her right and jerked her head to see Winona staring at her.
Sorry, Winona. I was just reminiscing about things.
A roar of thunder brought her back to reality.
I'm gonna need to get my coat.
She ran upstairs with a lit lantern and ran into her own room. She threw on her raincoat and galoshes, then ran back down. Winona followed her the entire time. Once she made it back downstairs, she raced to the front door and took a deep breath. She opened the door. She was greeted with a barrage of rain, wind, and a flash of lightning. Apple Bloom trembled and brought the raincoat closer to her. Before the door closed, Winona hurried outside with her.
Winona! Ugh. Go on in, Winona.
Winona whined, but refused to do so.
I can't have you follow me out here. It'll be dangerous and... scary.
Winona brought herself to Apple Bloom and licked her face.
Are you sure? You'll probably get all soaking wet.
Winona barked, her tail wagging. Apple Bloom smiled and hugged her.
You're the best dog a pony could ask for.
She shut the door, and the duo made their way into the orchard. Apple Bloom couldn't see very far in the rain and dark, even with the lantern. The wind kept howling at her, and the thunder kept booming angrily at her. The rain continued to pour down, chilling her through the raincoat. The puddles of mud soon became ponds, and she and Winona had trouble trudging through them. The only thing that gave her comfort was the trees above, for no matter how far backward they were blown, they wouldn't give in to the wind. Apples fell from them, but it was a small sacrifice for their well-being. At last, covered in water, mud, bruises, and cuts, she made it to the smallest tree. Apple Bloom yelled, dropping the lantern. She rushed over to Tennyson, who looked like he was trying his best just to hold ground.
Don't you worry none, Tennyson. I'm here now.
Winona ran after her, keeping close. Apple Bloom pushed the flailing tree back upright. The wind died down a bit, but Tennyson still drooped.
Mama's here now. Don't you worry. I'll take care of you.
Lightning illuminated the sky, and thunder bellowed at her. Apple Bloom squeaked and then screamed as 2 lightning bolts came from the dark clouds. Apple Bloom hugged Tennyson.
Okay, Apple Bloom. Just calm down. You gotta be strong for Tennyson. Yeah, for Tennyson. Don't let him see your...
The sky angrily roared, shaking the very ground. Apple Bloom screamed and hid herself under a nearby tree. Winona dashed after her, huddling herself against the frightened filly.
This wasn't a good idea at all. I shouldn't have come out here. I shouldn't have let you come along with me, Winona. I should have listened to Applejack.
She broke down in tears, burying her face in Winona's fur. Winona continued to whine, yet she placed her muzzle on Apple Bloom's nape, resting it there. The rain would not let up. It mercilessly poured down upon them. The lightning continued to attack Sweet Apple Acres, sending bolts flying everywhere, some almost hitting the treetops. Thunder roared across the land, shouting at everything to fear it. The wind, not to be outdone, swept over everything, sending apples and branches flying haphazardly. All Apple Bloom could do was cry, feeling hopeless among the forceful storm and the struggling apple trees. A knock on the head brought her out of her sobbing. She saw that it was one of the golden delicious apples from Tennyson. She looked over to him, and her face froze in shock at what she saw. He had been putting up a good fight, holding firmly in the ground, but now she could see his roots were beginning to come up from the muddy ground around him. His branches were almost brushing the ground, reaching out for her, and his trunk was beginning to crack. Apple Bloom darted towards him. She was soon reduced to laboured steps fighting the wind. Before she reached him, a small branch caught her coat, dragging her back. She threw the whole thing off and continued her pursuit.
Don't worry, buddy. I'm coming.
She finally made it to him and, still fighting the wind, pushed him upright again.
Don't worry, Tennyson. I'm here now.
She panted, and then continued in as soft a tone as she could.
I'm here for you, Tennyson. I'm not gonna leave you again. I promise.
She hugged him.
I promise.
Lightning and thunder called to her again, but she ignored them this time. She stayed that way for some time, her fur, mane and tail soaked and her hooves aching. The Brotherhood of Trees looked down upon them and seemed to strengthen their resolve, not giving an inch to the wind. For an instant, the rain, lightning and thunder were ignored by all, even Winona, still hiding under the tree.
See, Tennyson?
Apple Bloom panted in a quivering voice.
No need to worry. We'll get through this.
As she said this, The gale knocked at them again, bending the Brotherhood back suddenly and knocking Applebloom to her back. Tennyson's arms almost envelop her as his trunk cracked even more.
Come on!
Applebloom yelled as she uprighted herself. She hastily put him back upright, finding her galoshes covered in mud and hard to lift. She threw them off and kept her hooves on him.
I ain't gonna let anything bad happen to you, Tennyson!
She yelled, and then in a much softer and quivering tone added,
I ain't gonna let anything bad happen.
They stayed that way for a minute, and for a moment neither the lightning nor the thunder interrupted them. The wind calmed down a bit, but the rain refused to do so. Applebloom's hind legs began slipping in the hill of mud surrounding them. Her body shook, and she was panting, but she continued to hold him up.
Hey, do you remember that time we all stayed out here so you wouldn't feel scared? When the Timberwolves were howling and I forced Applejack, Big Mac, and Granny Smith to stay out here and keep an eye on you.
She giggled as thunder called for her attention.
We pitched a tent outside and had roasted marshmallows and s'mores and we played charades and poker. You were just beginning to grow those apples that...
She looked at his branches.
Still, we had fun, right? And it's not like you can't grow your own again.
She suppressed a sob. Simultaneously, 3 bolts of lightning came hurtling down from the heavens, thunder announcing its return with an ear-shaking roar, and the wind crashed into them. Applebloom wrapped her hooves around Tennyson.
This isn't the end, okay?
She yelled with determination.
We're gonna get through this! Y'all just wait and see!
She threw her 4 hooves into the ground and bucked him with her hind legs.
We're gonna...
Her hooves slipped in the mud, and her underside was soon covered in it. Without hesitation, she jumped up and bucked him before he could bow to the wind.
We're gonna... Just you wait, Tennyson!
She felt herself slipping again, but she dug her hooves in.
We'll make it! I'm not gonna...
Her body shook with exhaustion.
let anything bad happen to you!
As the army of lightning bolts scattered everywhere, thunder continued to cry out like a madman. The wind tried to blow everything away, and the rain continued its onslaught. Applebloom dug her hooves into the mud and held Tennyson up with all her might. Applejack opened the door to see the result of the storm. Past the glistening raindrops that fell from the eaves onto the porch, everything was a mess. The rocking chair propped up on the porch had rolled some way to hit a nearby tree and was partially sunk in a pond of mud. Apples and branches lay across the ground, some hidden by the mud, and the farm animals made a racket in the barn. Applejack sighed.
Well, this is gonna take a few days to clean up.
She stepped out into a puddle, hearing a mixture of mud and leaves slosh under her galoshes.
That was a right nasty storm last night.
With a sigh, she began walking into the orchard, not waiting for Big Macintosh to come out and help.
Applebloom! Winona!
She waited for a few seconds before calling out again.
Applebloom! Winona!
She heard a barking a ways away in the northwest field. She smiled. There was only one place over there Applebloom was even remotely interested in. Applejack began trotting in that direction.
That darn filly had me worried this morning. I guess she really cares about Tennyson. Reminds me of my first tree. Bloomberg was a good one. Always knew how to cheer me.
Her thoughts were halted by a sound. It was like whining, but it wasn't coming from Winona.
Applebloom?
She began cantering toward the noise, where Tennyson was.
Applebloom, are you all right?
She pushed past a bush to get a look at the scene, and gasped. There, in the clearing reserved for Applebloom and Tennyson, was Applebloom, lying face down over an uprooted apple tree, cracked beyond saving. Her body went from fits of sobbing to moments of stillness and crying. Winona had her head laying on the filly's nape. The trees surrounding them had raindrops falling off their leaves.
Oh, Applebloom.
A fool!
What was that?
A fool!
Come again, Sugar Cube?
Applebloom lifted her head, revealing a bruised face covered in cuts with red, swollen eyes.
A fool!
Applebloom?
She began, with a hoof to her sister's cheek.
What happened to you?
I came out here last night to check on Tennyson and...
You what?
Applejack yelled, her brow furrowing.
Didn't y'all see how bad that storm was? And didn't you see everything flying around? You could have been hurt, or worse.
I'm sorry! I just wanted to make sure he'd be okay! And I failed!
She flung herself over the tree again, sobbing. For a moment, Applejack couldn't speak. Applebloom continued to cry over Tennyson's trunk, his branches lying on the ground, no longer trying to touch her face. The only noise that could be heard was the occasional drop of rain from the trees, and Applebloom's crying. When Applejack couldn't take it any more, she walked over to her sister and placed a hoof on her back.
Hey, it weren't your fault.
I couldn't save him!
Applebloom said, without lifting her head.
Darling, these things happen.
Applejack stroked her sister's back.
You faced a big storm last night, and he just weren't ready to face it. These things, they just happen sometimes.
But why did it have to happen to him?
Applebloom looked up at her.
Why? Why the Pegasus have to make a storm that big? This is all their fault!
That's the way the world works, Sugar Cube. Sometimes we lose a tree and there's nothing we can do about it. Most grow to be very old, while some, like Tennyson, they move on to that great orchard at a young age. Don't be mad at the Pegasi. I'm sure they didn't mean to make a storm like this on purpose.
She continued stroking her sister's back as Applebloom continued to cry over Tennyson's trunk.
I'm worthless.
At this, Applejack nudged her sister's head up, forcing her to look her in the eye.
Now you listen here. You ain't worthless. Most ponies would have stayed in their homes, nice and warm, while their tree fell to the ground without a second thought. You ran out here and tried to help Tennyson make it through the storm.
But why couldn't I save him?
Because you're young and little.
Applejack drew her sister into a hug.
But you showed a lot of guts, and I'm proud of you.
Applebloom didn't stop crying as Applejack released her.
Hey, I gotta get started cleaning up the mess the storm left behind. Do you want to help?
Applebloom looked back at Tennyson.
Could I just have a few more minutes with him?
Take all the time you need.
Applejack replied with a simple nod. She began to walk away with Winona in tow, leaving Applebloom to cry over the trunk of Tennyson. His arms were still, his leaves were gone, and only a few of his roots still clung to the ground, fully intent on making his mother proud. The trees around him continued to cry in mourning for a lost brother.